ActionPoint's head of Microsoft Cloud Solutions, Finian Nally. Finian, if you'd like to take the mic.
That's great, Peter. Thanks very much. My name is Finian Nally, head of Microsoft Cloud Solutions with ActionPoint. I've been with the business a number of years now, and I'm going to take you through the journey today. I'd like to welcome Guido Marchetti on the call as well from Micro Warehouse. I've known Guido for a number of years now, and he has, I suppose, a wide-ranging expertise on device deployment and device security. So we're hoping to leverage on some of his expertise throughout the content this morning. The format is slightly different. We'll have a mix of slides and conversation as much as possible, and Peter will have a few polls throughout. So I suppose sit back and enjoy, and like Peter says, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So in terms of the agenda today, I suppose we're going to kind of keep it in blocks of three as much as possible. There's three key notes that we want to hit. First story is around device deployment. There has to be a better way. We're all struggling with this right now, so there must be a better way to do things. Secondly is securing and managing all devices. We're not just talking about the laptops and the new devices that our remote workers have. Every single device that touches our estate, we need to start securing and managing more effectively. And then we want to start adopting a new approach. How do we move from a reactive approach into a much more proactive approach to device management? In thinking about the challenges that are out there and maybe setting the scene a little ahead of getting into the meat of today, when we look back, often people say, okay, well, the hybrid workplace has created many challenges. Well, what it's actually done is has exacerbated those existing challenges. They were there already, but just now they're a little bit more obvious. And really, there's four key pillars around those challenges. The first is around the network. Our network perimeter is disappearing. We once felt confident that everything was inside the office and everything was protected by our network and our firewall. Well, the reality is, as we've seen over the years, people have started remote working, and now remote working has been forced on many people. But in addition to that, we're also collaborating and working with partners and customers and different organizations in much different ways. So we have to adapt to that. And the network perimeter is no longer just a fence around our office. Secondly, the resources and things are changing, things are moving to the cloud. We've seen it in many businesses that we have today around our account systems, our HR systems, our project management systems, even our email systems are all in the cloud right now. It is commonplace in most organizations. And in line with that, many more apps and devices are increasing across the organization. I think a stat going back from 5 or 6 years ago was that the average user had about 2.5 devices when we multiplied that across the companies. The reality is it's much more now. And in addition, we see on average about 140 apps across every business. And when I say the number 140, people often go, what are you talking about? We only have 10 or 20 different applications that we manage. It's the unknown aspect that is in the mix there as well. The apps that the end user is using just to get their job done, that IT and even the business have no visibility over. And lastly is the identity factor and the identity element that comes in here. If I look at my own setup here, I have 3 screens in front of me here. I could have my Outlook open on one window, my Gmail open on another window, and my WhatsApp Messenger open up on a third window. And really the lines between business and corporate and my personal identity and my corporate identity are all blurring into the one thing. I'm working away, but on my lunch break, I might jump onto my Gmail, or someone from work might message me over WhatsApp. So where is the line of my personal and my private and my business identity really there? It's very hard to distinguish. So we need to evolve our approach. We need to realize that we have to make that evolutionary leap into things. I've said already around the multiple business devices, around the SaaS applications. But if we look at how we operate an IT point of view, we need to move from that manual and reactive and high touch approach into the new way of doing things, into the automated, proactive and self-service approach. And that's a modern IT approach. And if we adopt that mantra throughout our business, we're really going to change things. And if we think about that in line with endpoint devices and all that's going on with those various interactions, it's quite complex. There's no doubt about it is that the challenge we're facing with is quite complicated. So we really want to try and simplify it and bring that down to a solution. And what we're here to talk about today is our unified endpoint management solution, a single solution to address many of those challenges and bring it all together. And at ActionPoint, we base our UEM solution around really the concepts of device lifecycle management. How do we enroll and deploy our devices? How do we configure, secure, and protect them? And lastly, how do we report and take action proactively? So with that, I'm going to jump into our first section around deployment. And the challenges and the conversations we're having with people are really, how do I reduce the complexity? How do I reduce the IT overhead, the time we're investing in actually deploying devices? And where do I go from there? So Peter, I might get you to put up a survey there just to get a flavor from the audience as to what they're actually doing, how people are deploying devices today, if you don't mind pushing that one out.
No problem. So the poll is just loading up there in front of you. I'm just going to read it out, guys, just so we have clarity on the answers. So the question is, how do you deploy devices today? First option is manual/time-consuming process, legacy imaging solution, modern fast solution for Windows only, no mobile, all-encompassing solution for every device type, and none of the above. So yeah, get involved there, guys. We'd love to see your answers, and we'll see what way the audience is split today on some of these options.
I suppose, Guido, over to you maybe briefly in terms of, the world of deployment out there. Often until our conversation last week, we had the view that there's corporate devices out there, and the other side of the coin, there's BYOD devices out there. But there's a lot in between as well. I suppose, what have you seen in your experience in terms of the deployment options and what's really happening out there?
I'll come off mute first. I almost started talking there. Brilliant. There's always one, isn't there? Thanks, Finian. I think it's a great question. And I think it's one that you need to have a real think about, because I think when we look at traditionally and think about ourselves as IT professionals, often we used to just worry about Windows. And I think the slides that you've brought us through here, just bringing us to this conversation point about the old way of thinking, we used to just worry about the Windows. Often you'd see people bring in iPhones, Android phones, and they usually came in through telcos. And IT would quite often go, not our problem. Yet, as you mentioned, we've seen the embrace of things like Office 365. We've seen things like Gmail, explosion in apps like Trello, Adobe Cloud. These are all platforms that people are really looking at embracing and using, and they can use these across all devices. That's the explosion. That's what Apple have done with the iPhone. They literally just changed everything, turned it on its head. And this concept of an app really started to, as we've seen and as you've talked about, move the firewall out of the equation, because these are cloud services. So as you move your resources into cloud services, and ultimately thinking about how you're going to start managing your devices in a more modern way around that. And we'll talk a little bit about it as we move through the day. But I definitely think that often people worry just about the traditional things. Windows devices, are they hardened? Are they domain joined? I think that's a concept we need to start letting go of. And we'll talk a little bit more about that point that you made around shifting the platform. Identity is potentially becoming your new firewall, and linking identity and device management side by side is huge. And again, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail as we move through today. But coming back to the point around what I see a lot of the time is I see people taking traditional methods, trying to apply them to modern business challenges, and quite often then making assumptions. So you mentioned different device types. Yes, we see corporate-owned devices, particularly when it comes to smartphones. So people will have a smartphone that is indeed paid for by the corporation. But in an awful lot of cases, and in a large majority of the cases, the actual Google ID or the Apple ID that unlocks that phone and makes it smart and connects it to the internet and all the app stores often is a personal identity. It's not a corporate identity. And that immediately starts to blur the lines in terms of how you should be managing that device, how you should be viewing that device, giving somebody the capability to remove their personal footprint from the device while maintaining the integrity of the device. So quite often I see people struggle with this challenge. Very often would I find somebody that has a corp fully managed device, or sorry, very rarely I would find somebody that has a corp fully managed where they have an enterprise Android enterprise program integrated into a UEM platform. And quite often what I also see is point solutions where maybe you've taken a step in terms of device management, but you've not started to integrate it into identity to get that unified experience across all of the devices. So quite a lot tends to happen in that space. And as we move into the hybrid world of work, I think those challenges are going to become more real for people.
That's great, Guido. Yeah, I think your point on the COPE devices, the company-owned, personally enabled devices is a real challenge, and it almost expands out that whole corporate approach kind of things. The device may be corporate owned, but what are we actually doing? Have IT really taken on board that is a true endpoint device and can effectively do everything that your laptop and your normal Windows 10 device can do? So in thinking again of the deployment side of things, we really want to streamline things, and we want to start making it flexible. And to Guido's point, it's not just about the Windows 10 world. The tools and technology are there to look at the breadth of our estate in terms of devices. So we can start introducing zero-touch provisioning, not only Windows devices, but our Apple devices, our iOS devices, and our Android devices as well. So this makes it very, very easy for IT to set up policies, set up profiles, and actually roll things out in a very, very managed and controlled fashion, while at the same time saving a lot of overhead from a time point of view. So to dive a little bit deeper into some of the aspects of that, the first one I wanted to touch on in terms of deployment was the Windows aspect. Again, for many of us, the Windows overhead is huge for us, the level of time and investment we go into deploying devices initially, but also redeploying devices, which is often overlooked. New staff coming on board, staff changing roles, maybe day-to-day staff churn, people leaving the business, as well as that factor of the support aspect of, well, devices need to be wiped, repurposed, upgraded, done, or something else done to them. How do we manage all of that? How do we effectively deploy things in this new world that we have, where most people are working from home, or actually our business has grown and we have multiple locations around the country or around the globe? All of these factors come into play. And at ActionPoint, when we look at device optimization and look at implementing Windows 10, we want to automate things. We want to automate the software, the settings, the update, the features, and the user data, ultimately to make that device ready for production use. We're moving beyond the traditional approach of, well, I need to manage an image, I need to create images, I need to build images. We're actually doing all of this by policy. So setting up and continuously managing policies is a much more effective way to do things, because we're leveraging the underlying technology of Windows 10 and the underlying technology that's built into the Microsoft Cloud to enable all of this. So what does this process actually mean? What does it look like in practice? So the simple diagram that I have on the screen there kind of illustrates what's actually going on here. So we have our IT admin or IT partner who's in charge of looking after our UEM solution. And really we can split things down the middle. We have our new PC estate or our existing PC estate. Simply put, we register our devices with the Autopilot service. The Autopilot services leverage the configuration that we've put into play around Intune and Azure Active Directory. What policies do we want in place? What software do we want in place? What updates do we need? What are the various requirements on that device? And lastly, the device hits the user and they just work away as normal. So it becomes a very, very simple process. Now, obviously it sounds overtly simple the way I'm articulating it right now, but from an end user experience point of view, what we're seeing in reality is that it is very seamless. It is very easy for them to get on board. The device lands with them. They open up the device, they select their keyboard, they select their network in terms of logging onto their Wi-Fi. They log in as they normally would with their normal username and password and multi-factor authentication if enabled. And then Windows takes it from there on in. It logs in, it gets the Intune enroll settings, configures the policies, all in the background while the end user is just sitting there without any IT involvement. Their apps are downloaded, be it their Office apps, their Acrobat apps, or whatever other third-party apps they're using are all loaded down. And lastly, the device is set up, business ready and end user ready. Again, no interaction from IT. The end user has gotten their device, they've gotten a good experience, and that gives benefits on both sides of the coin. We're giving the benefit to IT, having the confidence that, right, our device is enrolled properly, it's enrolled correctly, it's meeting all our company criteria. And we're giving confidence to the end user that actually this is a modern company I'm working for. This is a seamless process. Things have been done very, very easily. And the experience I have as an employee is actually really, really good. So the company is getting, or the organization is getting benefits on both sides of the coin on that front. And that same process or a similar process can also be leveraged on our Android and also on our Apple front. Using the likes of Apple Automated Device Enrollment, we can adopt a similar stance and say, well, actually, if we have corporate devices that are iOS devices, well, we can use the ADE process to do the same thing. We register them with Apple and we ship the device to the end user. And it knows that this is a corporate owned and corporate managed, not personally managed or personally enabled device. And it deploys the correct configuration to that device, all in a very seamless fashion. Again, back to that point about zero touch to the end user. So the three things to remember there, and look, there are many, many benefits there, but I think that the three I'd hit on is that we have a standardized approach to managing all devices. We're making a real impact to end users and to IT, regardless of their location. But in addition to that, we're setting the platform for what's next. We're implementing a platform across our devices that actually we can start to build on. And where we really want to build on is the security and management aspect. I see it on a regular basis. You know, how do we move from a set it and forget it approach into a more managed approach? How do we start to really realize the dream of this zero trust model? And how do we operate improvement on a continuous fashion? And look, there are many more challenges out there, and some of the stats I pulled from a recent survey, you know, in terms of IT organization, 5% is the typical IT investment as a percentage of the organization's actual revenue. The reality for most small and mid-sized businesses, it's not a fraction of that. It's well below 5% is the actual investment. So how can you effectively manage your devices and manage your estate with that limited budget? From a security point of view, 72% of companies cite data leakage and loss as a top security concern for bring your own devices. Bring your own devices are just expected in most businesses now. They're there. So we have to figure out, right, how are we going to prevent data loss in there? And lastly, 80% of companies are actually dependent on the BYOD thing. People expect that they're bringing their personal devices, and companies aren't going to invest on having a corporate device of every type for every single user. So there's a lot of challenges there. So I might just bring up a quick poll, Peter, if you can switch it on there in terms of how do you actually secure your devices today? And I suppose, Guido, to bring you into the conversation again, in terms of, you know, securing devices today and moving away from that fragmented and legacy approach, which we'll talk about briefly, you know, what does the world look like? How should we really start to secure, and where do we want to go to? What's the North Star in terms of device security?
Yeah, again, it's another great question, Finian. You've touched off so many great points in those slides as we were coming through them. I mean, if people were watching closely, you will have noticed Azure Active Directory is a core component of part and parcel of modernizing your security posture, tying that with Intune or Endpoint Manager or whatever you want to call it these days, is also a huge part of what you're looking at doing. And that's where, as you talked about, that whole process of, as the device is presented to the cloud, it's asking for the username and password. That then kicks off the next mechanism that then enrolls it into the device management platform, which in turn talks to everything else at the back end. But it's at that enrollment stage where people really need to be thinking about looking at the policies and creating that standardization that we've talked about. So creating a standard for Windows, looking at the minimum OS that you're willing to look at and willing to maintain, that ongoing management, looking at those update cycles, and really starting to create a compliance standard for your devices. Because at the end of the day, we need to be cognitive of the type of devices we allow to connect. Because as devices age, as OSs age, they become more and more vulnerable. So I'm always speaking to people about the importance of having that compliance set of standards, that bare minimum where you will only trust devices. And of course, then you expand that into a zero trust, looking at conditional access policies, and you can actually then target the actual compliance state of the device. So if it doesn't meet the compliance state, if it's not at the level of OS, if it doesn't have a version of the app that you want it to have, you can deny access into the resources. And you're really getting into a granular level of access control and policy control that will help you modernize and reduce the risk. Also, as well, just to touch on your point, fascinating point on DLP and data loss, right? So how do you go about preventing it? That's where understanding how a UEM platform and using MAM to target your business applications. I would actually, you mentioned there, BYO is a very, very large concern. I'd have a concern for COPE devices, because COPE devices are inherently dangerous. As we mentioned already, there is a personal side of that phone and a business side. And as a tech savvy person, I can download content that I'm entitled to download because of my job role. And if I've got personal silos then that I can move information into, the bilateral movement of data on these devices is so risky. So understanding that risk factor, and again, using MAM and policies protecting your business applications, is a core part of what people should be looking for.
That's great, Guido. Thanks. I think it's interesting, you know, looking at this slide here, our current and maybe fragmented and class it as maybe a legacy approach, but looking at our survey results, we have almost 80% of people are actually in this bucket right now. You know, the approach of going, well, our Windows environment, they're domain joined, we have group policy, antivirus, and we have encryption, but that's only for the laptops. We don't need encryption anywhere else. And then we move from there into our corporate mobile, where we have the ability to maybe remote wipe, maybe enforce a PIN, and we have multiple solutions doing that, and that's kind of where it stops. That's our approach. And often it's a challenge. I think it's, you know, the single biggest challenge is the learning curve. It's understanding that there is a better way to do it, that there is a more modern way to do it. And I'm going to touch on a few aspects of that right now. So in looking at our Windows 10 device, How do we evolve that? How do we move on from just pure group policy into something more modern and something that's best practice? Well, in our device configuration and using, again, the power of our UEM service to say, actually, we have a Windows 10 profile and it's built on multiple elements. The first is security baselines. If I want to know how to secure a device, where do I start? As an IT professional, there's lots of things that I have opinion on, and there's lots of things that my partners and maybe IT companies globally have opinions on. But what's good practice? So leveraging Microsoft's out-of-the-box baselines and security baselines is a good place to start. Secondly, what are the individual settings, the things that we want to do in our organization? So using policy, again, to fill in the gaps there on certain restrictions that we'd have in our business. From there, moving into AMDX templates, similar to your GPO templates in group policy, the ability to apply those settings, simple things like customized desktops and more advanced things like folder redirection and various other security features. And lastly, ensuring that our device actually meets compliance. Our compliance standard that we've set up in terms of applying all of these settings, built into that as well, the version of the OS, where the OS is, and much, much more, is our device compliant. So building all of those things into a Windows 10 profile, we now have a much more robust Windows 10 device. And we can adopt similar things with not only with iOS, but with also Android and macOS as well. So to touch on those aspects in a little bit more detail, like I said, so using security baselines, it's pre-configured groups. These are pre-configured and recommended settings by Microsoft. So they're rubber stamped and they're industry and globally recognized. Secondly, using those administrative templates. So again, we have thousands of features that we can control across Microsoft Edge, OneDrive, and much, much more. So we have scope to do a lot more and get really, really granular on how we approach things. And down to the level of, we want to go custom. There's custom settings that we want to implement across certain applications or certain things across our devices. But we have that granularity of control, which is second to none across the board. And what that does, as Guido touched on, it starts our zero trust journey. We at the start we talk about that zero trust, or that element of zero touch provisioning, and then we're moving into that zero trust journey now. How do we start to realize that? What's the first step on the journey? Well, we have our device enrolled, we're ready to go. But Guido mentioned conditional access is one of the key pillars of that. So what is conditional access? Well, it allows us to set rules on what people can and can't do and where they can do it. Are people coming in on a managed device first and foremost? Well, this is a managed device. It has our policies. So therefore, you can start to do some things if you come in correctly. Are you in the correct location? Are you coming in with the correct credentials? And what is your risk profile like? So if we think about many of the phishing attacks, many of the, ransomware attacks and general cyber attacks across the board, often what we see is credentials are leaked, credentials are stolen in some shape or form, and people are coming in from their devices somewhere else around the globe or some automated fashion throughout the globe. So leveraging this approach of conditional access reduces the risk on that front, reduces the risk that if our passwords are compromised, even if our multi-factor authentication is compromised, well, that we have extra layers of protection in the mix there as well to make things much, much more robust. And if we look at the complexity of actually what's going on behind the scenes with conditional access, we're taking, starting from the left-hand side, our identity, our device profile, our location, the applications that we come in on, and we're leveraging the power of the Microsoft Cloud and the millions and millions of signals that are going in there to really make an informed decision automatically to say, well, actually, yes, you are allowed into this resource. You have come in with all the right credentials. Or, sorry, no, we're giving you limited access because we don't allow this information or this application in use outside the four walls of our office. Or, do you know what, we're going to block you because, simply put, you haven't come in with all the right signals. And all of this, again, is zero touch. It's without IT involvement. It's without someone having to make a decision in real time, because it is actually happening automatically in real time. So again, we're reducing our overhead. I mentioned it earlier on, the set it and forget it approach no longer works. And really we want to understand, well, why does the set it and forget it approach not work? Can I not just go and set up all of these policies and use this modern technology? And once I have it all set up, great, it's all just going to work and I can walk away. Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, with any new technology, there is a management overhead and there's a management need, because technology is evolving so fast. And at the same time, and in the same vein, cybersecurity threats are evolving equally as fast. So to touch on a few reasons why, I just pulled out a few stats, I suppose, looking at some of the core OSs, Windows 10, Android, and iOS. And if we look at the iteration of these in terms of the OS versions, often people say, well, yes, Windows 10 is Windows 10. Unfortunately not. Windows 10 is not Windows 10. We need to understand that it has multiple versions of it, that they're changing on an 18-month cycle. And that if we look back to the version that was released back in November 12, 2019, that's actually no longer supported. Likewise, our Android version, well, if we're down in version 8, which I've seen in many companies, again, Android 8, version 8, accessing corporate resources, well, that's actually no longer supported. There's no longer security fixes for that device. So why are we actually allowing that onto our network or to access corporate resources? So as IT professionals, we need to keep on top of, right, are we on a current version? Are we on the latest security package? But not only that, do we actually understand what the latest security features are of that release? It's not as if these releases are just static from one release to the next. They actually come with a whole cohort of new features to make us more secure and do a lot more with us. So we need to understand what they are and how to enable them for our business, which creates complexities. I mentioned the security baselines, and the security baselines are continuously moving as well. We have baselines for Microsoft Edge, for Windows 10, for our Microsoft 365 apps. And so far in 2021 alone, there's been 8 new releases of the security baseline. So there's a lot going on there, and we have to keep up to date with that as well. And in addition to that, the underlying platform, our underlying technology of our UEM platform, Microsoft Intune, is changing on an almost weekly basis. We've seen 16 updates in 2021 alone. And those 16 updates contain sometimes 2 or 3 minor updates, or they can contain 20 to 30 major updates across the platform. We, again, as IT professionals managing our digital estate, need to understand actually how do we go about, how do we invest the time in not only having an awareness that things are changing, but also understanding and being able to implement that as change, what's going on there. So it's important that we evolve our thinking and actually say, we do need to move to a managed posture. Our unified endpoint management, the management element is the key part of that, and that's a continuous element that is important. So that's touching on the security. And again, I'm conscious in the time we have today, we're only skimming the surface of it, but it's more an awareness to get you to understand that there is a lot more we can do on that front. But we're in a much better place now, or we hope, by evolving to this stage, we're in a much better place. And back to one of my first slides about the modern IT approach, how do we start to move things along? How do we really start to, take all this information and maybe turn this information into wisdom and understanding to actually make change or make a real impact across the business? And the challenges that are out there are manyfold in terms of reporting. What's our inventory status? What's our compliance status? And what's actually going on proactively and what is being proactive? So another quick survey I might just ask, can you effectively report in your device estate right now? Peter, if you want to launch that one. And in terms of Guido, just to bring you into the conversation again, that reporting aspect, I suppose in our own experience, it's quite limited. We've seen everything from Excel files down to an outdated list. How important is having effective reporting on your device estate?
It's hugely important in terms of kind of trying to protect yourself against those zero-day threats that can literally just come out of left field and really cause you substantial problems. That's what I love about the UEM platform of Intune. It gives you that dashboard when you've set some of those baseline policies and you keep them maintained, particularly that one around OS. I think that's vitally important, the maintenance of that. It starts to simplify your day-to-day management of things. I mean, if you have a large estate of 600, 700 devices or people, let's say, you can then safely assume if you've 700 people, you've 1,400 devices that you're now trying to manage. And that's absolutely colossal. You really need the ability to centrally see and at the drop of a hat identify devices that maybe are at risk or could be coming at risk to give you all of that. So I find ourselves, whether it's Office 365, whether it's the security side of Microsoft, we often find ourselves drowning in data. And that's where I think partners like ActionPoint can really help their customers with those type of insights, how to make a sense of those insights and then take actions off the back of it. It's hugely important because you can really reduce your risk by maintaining a good level of standard, having that device compliance tied intricately to your identity. That zero trust security posture makes it far harder for a hacker to get into the environment. And it's vitally important that you're actioning any insights you're getting from the system, Finian.
Yeah, that's really good. Good points there. I think what's interesting as I look at the survey results that everyone submitted there, that limited visibility, it's more than 50%. And if we go back to actually the first survey that we put out in terms of the device deployment, that 50% mark as well is actually closer to 60% have that manual process of deploying devices. So I think that follows through directly into, well, if I'm manually deploying, well, then most likely I'm manually reporting as well. And that leaves just so many holes and opens things up so many places.
Makes it very challenging. I totally agree.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think what's an interesting one for me, one of the reports we use when we look at compliance, when we start to, I suppose, implement our UEM service, looking at the compliance stats, this is something we see quite often, is that maybe some organizations have made an investment in Endpoint Manager or Intune already. They're saying, yeah, we're good, we have policies set up. What does that look like? When we actually start to look, and when we look at the compliance levels across the board, we see an awful lot of red, and this is continuous. And again, it comes back to the point of, well, actually, why are we seeing red there? Well, we haven't offboarded devices properly. Devices aren't meeting compliance standard. We haven't updated our compliance standard. Android 8 was okay last year, but now it's no longer okay, but we haven't changed our policy not to allow it anymore. So in doing that constant tuning, we want to look at, let's move everything into a compliant first and foremost, but let's keep everything in the green. The more stuff we get in the red, the more issues, the more potential risk there is for the business. And leveraging the reporting power within Endpoint Manager and our UEM service, we're able to get very, very granular over that. But in addition to that, we're also able to use that in terms of real device inventory. Actually, what's going on across our estate? How many Surface Books have we got? How many Dell devices have we got? How many iPhones have we got? How many end users have we got have BYOD? Do we have the corrective policies? So it allows us to actually proactively change that conversation from a almost defensive conversation to actually a very proactive conversation, and from our back up to the business to say, well, actually, guys, we're seeing a lot of non-compliant issues or compliance issues across the board, and it's down to this type of device, or it's down to our corporate standard allowing this type of device in. We need to change things. We need to update our policy. We need to educate our end users on it. So that's the starting point from a reporting point of view, and that gives almost the risk and security point of view. But from an IT point of view, we want to do more. We want to start to, I suppose, give back to the business, or give better awareness back to the business. And one of the areas we can do that in is around our startup performance. So the fact that we now have a platform in place that is actively looking at our devices, is actually taking intelligence from our devices. The power of the UEM service gives us things like a boot score and sign-in score. So a simple example of that is, well, if I've got a fleet of 1,000 devices out there, and it turns out 20% of them are using legacy hard drives, whereas the other 80% are using SSDs, that 20% chances are much, much slower at booting up than the others, purely because of the hard drive. Well, if I can zoom in on those and say, actually, yeah, I can understand that 20% fleet, it turns out we have a few issues. We have a procurement issue. We're buying the wrong devices with the wrong discs on them. Or we have a legacy issue from a procurement point of view. And you know what? We need to target our budget from next year. Even saying that really changes the conversation that us as IT professionals are now having. We're saying to the business, actually, we now know 6 months, 12 months, 18 months in advance what our endpoint budget looks like. We can now start to forecast that out, because we know that, yes, those devices are legacy, but now we can give you a definition of legacy. We can say that they're having a real impact on our staff. The staff, those 20% of staff, are taking 10 minutes extra per day to start up in the morning. What's that over the course of a year? How many staff have we got? Now we're really starting to make a financial impact. And, back to my point earlier on about that 5% budget, we can start to justify that bit back to the business. We can say, hey, look, our 0.1% here of IT budget, we need to increase that, and here's why, and here's what we can make an impact on. Some other areas that the reporting covers as well, in terms of restart frequency. How many times do I do it myself here on a regular basis? Come in on a Monday morning, turn on my device, and it's still the same device that I switched on a Friday, and I'm scratching my head wondering why things aren't working or why it's so slow. Simply put, I haven't restarted. Now, luckily enough, I know that I have to do that. There's no point in me ringing the IT support desk around that. But how many of us have dealt with those calls, those continuous calls that happen week on week on week? I'm having issues, things aren't working. But we're going through normal support means, right? What isn't working? Let's look at the logs. And ultimately, all that device needed was a restart. So if we can start to get proactive and say, well, hang on a second, it turns out 50% of our workforce don't restart. Well, let's educate them. Let's start informing these people the importance of doing simple restarts. Let's actually, maybe in some respects, we need to force restarts. We need to schedule that with scripting and doing that. And by scripting, then we can start to really get under the hood. Because we can deploy scripts, we can start to do things on a much more advanced level. One of these is hard drive health monitoring, and I must give credit to Microsoft MVP, Morris Daly, who published an article on this one specifically. How do we actually pull the metrics that are in our hard drives, that are in our laptops and our desktops out there, and pull the metrics off them, and the drive signals that maybe it's missing multiple writes, or it's having many bad reads? How do we pull them in advance and say, well, actually, let's rate our device. Let's look at, do we have a cohort of devices? Maybe, again, it's back to that 20% devices that are old and don't have SSDs. And the hard drives are gradually starting to fail on them. Well, if we can zone in and say, well, actually, of that 20%, 5% are likely to fail, let's target them first and foremost. You know what? They're going into the December upgrade bucket. And because we've got our new modern deployment method, we're able to deploy things in a much more efficient fashion. We're just literally going to ship a device out to that end user. It's going to arrive in the post and they're going to go, hey, great, I've got a new device. They don't need to know why. They don't need to know anything about it. It's just a case of send us back the old device. We'll work on that. And you now have a new device ready to roll. Type in your username and password and away you go. So all of a sudden we're ticking many, many boxes. Again, that end user experience looks great. They've got a new device before anything bad happened, before they had to even call support. The time we've invested in support has been eliminated. And what we're doing with our actual team is we're channeling the resources. We're saying, well, actually, we don't want to build up a huge support team here. Actually, we want to build up a team of professionals that are delivering value back to the business and can quantify value back to the business. So we're evolving our overall IT platform into that modern approach. Again, leveraging the reporting that's in our UEM service. And ultimately, where can that bring us? There's many possibilities, but one myself and Guido have spoken about it, and Guido, you might give some comment on this, is moving towards global standards, one of which could be CIS 20 controls, to say, well, actually, because we have this platform, because we're reporting on it, because we're continuously updating it, actually, it turns out we're now addressing many of the CIS 20 controls and other standards. In your experience, Guido, are many organizations looking at that, or what's the advantage in doing that?
Yeah, I think a handful of companies are beginning to start looking at this. Often it comes from a situation where people are in a heavily regulated industry and they need to meet certain compliance standards. So whether they be PCI standards or they could be ISO in some cases, which is very stringent. But definitely, I'm a big fan of standards, because what it does is, coming back to your ongoing management, it gives you that set of baselines to be able to say back to the business and to add value, we will meet these international standards. And what I am beginning to see with companies of all sizes, when they're engaged with other companies on the business to business, they're now getting very comprehensive security questionnaires in. And they're turning around to IT partners in most cases saying, are we covered to say yes to all of these? And really, I think having these standards in your kit bag is a great way of going about deploying your security posture, because when those questions come in, you can stand over them with confidence saying, we adhere to the following international standards. It's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think it elevates the status of many IT teams who are often maybe dismissed or siloed out with their small budgets kind of thing. Actually, adopting this approach, elevates the status and really allows you to make impact on the business. So, in summary, I suppose of today, the three key things we wanted to touch on was take a modern approach to device deployment. Remember Windows Autopilot, our iOS deployment, our Android deployment. Think about those COPE devices. How many of you have those COPE devices, corporate owned, personally enabled? Start taking a modern approach to security and compliance, leveraging the security or the security baselines that are there, and really getting this mindset from a zero trust approach. Zero trust security is where we want to go. All organizations, be it small or large, actually have to start to move into that position. And actually, most of us are already behind the curve on that front. And then take a modern approach to reporting and proactive remediation, because modern cybersecurity is not set it and forget it. It is continuously evolving. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we need to make sure that our organization, again, no matter how big or how small, actually needs to take advantage of that. And our UEM service actually enables all of the above. So feel free to speak to us more. And with that, I suppose I'm going to hand it over to Q&A and maybe a couple of next steps. I suppose, Peter, I know you're going to publish up a survey in a second, and we'll go through some of the questions that are coming in. But in terms of next steps, if you want to speak to us more about UEM and how we can enable that service across your business, or if you want to speak to us about a cybersecurity assessment that can actually uncover many of the issues in your business in line with CIS 20 controls, reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you on it. So I see a couple of questions coming in there.
Great stuff. Yeah, thanks, Finian, and thanks, Guido. Yeah, we'll jump into Q&A. So I have a question here from the guys in 3D Personnel. They have asked, will it be profitable to implement Windows 10 modern management for our organization if we already have a centralized endpoint security system with asset and inventory system? I think by profitable, they mean cost effective.
Yeah, I think it comes down to many aspects, but for me, it's about the single pane of glass approach. Many of the legacy systems only cover certain things. We have a system for our Windows devices. We have something else for our mobile devices. We have something else that is doing antivirus, we have something else that is doing something else kind of thing. So leveraging the power of this technology, we're bringing it all into a single pane of glass approach. And by doing that, and I suppose integrating with the fundamentals of Azure Active Directory and everything that's under the hood there, we're now in a much better place from a security point of view, from I suppose IT standards point of view, to bring on new staff, to bring on new team, and say, look, this is our single pane of glass view into things. And it also gives us opportunity to actually to ask more of those questions that I mentioned earlier on. So yeah, I think it's, profitable, cost effective. It really depends on what you're spending right now. And I think if businesses look at those siloed solutions that they have in place right now, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Finian. Yeah, guys, do get your questions in, and we'll be here for another couple of minutes. So any queries you have, I would use the time wisely. Great to have Guido and Finian giving us their time today.
Yeah, Guido, I was going to ask you, I suppose, while we're waiting there, in terms of your own experience and the number of organizations that you're dealing with, the adoption rate of these new, I suppose, I hesitate actually to call them new technologies because they've been around for such a long time. They're no longer new. It's just they're evolving so fast. But what are you seeing in reality? Businesses, small and mid-sized businesses, how are they adopting this, or are they embracing it?
I think what's happening now is there's a real realization, and particularly I think COVID-19 has accelerated that this is something that people need to get to grips with. That question there is a great question that came in terms of, is it going to be cost effective? Because I think you're right, Finian. I think those point solutions that we often see, I do see SMEs quite frequently, and even large SMEs that have those point solutions in place, and that just lends itself to that slightly older way of thinking, that older approach. So while modern technologies have evolved rapidly, I think everybody is trying to play catch up in terms of trying to understand how they can change things. And sometimes it's our own inertia that stops us from just taking that step, right? We always stay in our comfort zone, don't we, at the end of the day? Nobody likes change. None of us like change. So it's about pushing ourselves to that change because the benefits are huge. I mean, we've talked about at a very, very high level some of the technologies, but you've talked very, very clearly around that single pane of glass, that unified platform that leverages identity, integrates identity and device management, but then that also lends itself into application management. It lends itself into data protection and data management. And there's lots of the narrative. And then you can start going into threat defense. So whether it be at the 365 level or the device level, Microsoft have various levels of licensing that allow you to layer these things in, reducing your need for third-party tools in some cases and helping you just try to simplify and standardize. And I think that's one of the big things. It's that standardization of everything. Often I find people have various different flavors of everything going on. Standardizing things, while may seem more expensive in the short term in terms of, yes, you may have to do X, Y, and Z to get there. When you get there, the return on investment in terms of management overhead, it starts to simplify things for you.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think it comes back to many of those points and the experience, the staff perception. And I think we're in a world where really staff have choice right now in terms of what organizations they want to work with and where they want to work. So not only if you're giving a good experience to your end users, but in terms of your IT team, if you're evolving your IT team, not to be stuck in the trenches, setting up devices and doing mundane support things, but in a more proactive and modern approach, they're going to be much more happier in their careers and really stick with the organization for longer. Fingers crossed.
There's a great question in there in terms of what kind of Office 365 license will you need to deploy Windows 10 Modern Management? Do you want to take that one, Finian?
Yeah, I suppose we look at the Microsoft 365 suite, and really you're looking at Business Premium E3 or E5. Look, with every Microsoft licensing question, there's lots of nuances in there, but they're the core SKUs. Once you're in any of those three SKUs, you're good. But also we see the availability of this technology for frontline workers as well. So, if you've got workers out on the docks or on the factory floor or in retail, there's opportunity in there to invest in some of the frontline workers plans that will deliver the same thing.
I totally agree. And I would suggest that if you're looking at these technologies, and let's say, for example, you're looking at Azure AD and you're looking at Intune, there's generally 4 components of the Microsoft security narrative, 5 when you add in Defender. If you're looking at 2 of the 5 products, the bundle makes perfect sense. It just makes perfect sense. There's huge value. And it does start at that M365 Business Premium, which allows you to scale up to that 300 users, at which point then you've got to tip into the enterprise flavors. And I'm a big fan of those SKUs. I think customers can get so much value out of that, and working with a partner like yourselves, Finian, they can drive massive value out of those type of investments.
Yeah, I think value is the operative word, and continuously we see the challenge there in terms of understanding of the Microsoft SKU set and going, right, really what do we want to do with it? And a session like today really illustrates the value that we can extract just about one small portion of it, kind of thing. And we do many more sessions, around different aspects on the Microsoft 365 front that really get businesses to understand what's there, but not only what's there and well, that's cool, isn't it? But more so, right, how does that impact our business? How does that change the optics and change the conversation? And there's so much in there, as you said.
Totally agree. And I really like the point you made as well around frontline workers or frontline staff. Profile your staff, understand their IT needs, understand the devices that they're working on. And I often have questions in, and this question always baffles me in terms of, I only quite recently had a very, very large health organization on the call, not the HSE, but would have worked with them, right? And despite everything that's going on with the HSE at the moment and that absolute mess, the feedback or the question I got hit was, look, we want to protect the top 25% of our staff with something like multi-factor authentication and conditional access, but we're happy to leave the others unprotected. To which my response was, why would you leave so much of your estate unprotected? So don't just take a view of, if we protect the top guys because they're only the people that will be targeted. They won't be. They'll target anybody. They will target any avenue into your business. So when you're looking at your security posture, look at it as a whole, from the front line all the way back to your information workers. Leave no open doors, because if you leave it slightly ajar, someone will slip in. It will be exploited and someone will slip in.
Yeah, it's the classic one of we put all the security cameras and bars on our front door and on the back door, but we leave all the windows open. So,
it's like the honest man lock I have in my shed. Anybody who knows what they're doing will come along and unscrew the part that it latches into, and they're going to take all the bikes out of it. Right? It's pointless. I only have it for show.
Very good. Thanks a million, Guido, for your time and for your insights. I think it's been really good. So I think maybe with that, Peter.
Yeah, just wanted to flag a few things. So the recording of this will be available after the webinar, and we'll email out the presentation as well. Our offer today is a free consultation to speak to us about UEM. So if you want to leave your feedback in that poll I've just posted, I think most of you have done that already. From my own perspective, thank you to Guido, our special guest today, and hopefully we'll see you on a webinar again soon. And to Finian again for an excellent presentation. That's it from us for this week. We have a couple of events coming up over the summertime. So we'll keep you posted on that. Just keep an eye out for some of our email that's been sent out. And without further ado, have a lovely afternoon. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, guys.